Let's psychoanalyze our favorite psychopath, Wednesday Addams. I know the torment is killing you, so let's jump into it. So what do we need to know about Wednesday Addams? Before we psychoanalyze, we first need to know, who the heck is she? So what do we know? One, she has parents and they're together. They are very much in love, Morticia and Gomez. She has a younger sibling, Pugsley, so she is the oldest. That's very important. She's also someone who has been exposed to a lot of suffering and torture, and she's kind of a masochist. So if you think about it, her pleasure dome is about suffering and torture. She loves it. If there was a Disneyland that was full of torture and chaos and suffering, she would be all about that life. Now, what we know is also very important with regards to her family unit and how she engages with the family. So we want to understand what that looks like in terms of dynamics with her siblings or sibling, and dynamic with her parents. So as we see in the TV show Wednesday, she's a teenager, she's just trying to find her sense of self, she's trying to find her own identity, and she's doing this in her own way. I love it because this is so existential in the sense of she's just living her best life the way in which she wants to, and she doesn't give a shit about what other people think. So if she's gonna go off and she wants to, I don't know, lay in a coffin because that's relaxing to her, like a spa day, then she's gonna go do it. Doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks. Kudos to her. And if you're someone who does that, if you're someone that lives your best life, that doesn't give a shit about what other people are saying in terms of judgment, and you're just going along being you, living your genuine life, then by all means, have fun, have at it, and I applaud you. So Wednesday, in terms of her secure sense of self, I applaud that. With regards to her interests, that's a little bit questionable. Torturing, suffering, I mean, that's not typical. We usually care about people. We like to be empathetic and support other people. At least typically, we like to do this. But for someone like Wednesday, it's kind of backwards for her. So she's a bit of a masochist in that sense. And on top of that, she doesn't really care about people. She cares about herself. Sound familiar? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so now we have a little bit of an understanding of Wednesday as a teenager. We also need to understand Wednesday. If we look back at the Tim Burton movies in the 90s, love these movies. Thank you, Tim Burton. You are amazing. You are such an artist. It's so important to look at the first movie, The Addams Family, because here is where Wednesday and Pugsley, they're younger, they're smaller, they're trying to navigate life in the sense of reuniting with their long lost Uncle Fester. So they begin to build this relationship with Uncle Fester, and it's so important to see how Wednesday and Fester bond in the first movie. You know, he teaches her how to sword fight for the play that she is part of, and it's just so wonderful about that family loving dynamic. So then the next movie, we see Wednesday a little bit older. So she's preteen or 13, so she's entering into the teenage years. And this is quite significant because then we start seeing a bit of a change. One, we notice that another sibling is born. So a baby is born. And what that means for Wednesday is not something that is more nurturing and loving and caring, that she's going to take care of this baby, but rather it's a baby that needs to be destroyed in her mind, right? This is a child that's going to somehow take over the family. So that is a pretty big issue if you think about it, because if you look at the theory with regards to birth order and what ends up happening to, you know, the first child when the second child or third child is born, it's very interesting. So if you're interested in that, I can do a whole other video on Adler and talking about the inferiority complex and all that lovely jazz. But I think it's important to really understand that from this dynamic, seeing Wednesday very young and then seeing her grow up to a 13-year-old young woman is pretty transformational. So her personality stays the same, but what she experiences is a little bit different. She goes off to camp. Now she's also interacting with other people, and it's very interesting. She kind of has a first crush. So for someone who does not show any form of emotion, or maybe even doesn't have the ability to feel, some people just don't have the ability to feel. They just don't have the ability to understand from a subjective perspective what sadness is, or what happiness is, or what excitement is. So individuals who very rarely, if at all, experience any form of emotion now are faced with a dynamic where there's a potential romantic partner. That's a little bit scary. How are we supposed to navigate these waters? I don't know. But for Wednesday, understanding these pieces from when she's a child and playing with Pugsley and taking care of Pugsley. So even though she's very aggressive towards him in terms of like their sibling play, she really cares about him and she does protect him. And we can also see this in Wednesday now as a 16-year-old, because she, in the very, very first episode of the very first season, we see Wednesday sticking up for Pugsley. These horrible kids bullied him and shoved him in a locker. And Wednesday now is not only upset, and we can see a little bit of anger in that very limited range of emotion, that now she feels as though that she needs to go off and that she needs to protect Pugsley. So there's this strange dynamic internally, not just externally with other people, but internally as well, because she doesn't talk about her feelings. It doesn't seem like she has a wide range of emotion, yet she has a crush on Tyler. Very, very interesting. How does that even happen? Now we have an understanding of who Wednesday is, which is very important. We want to understand what life was like from the beginning all the way up until now. So if you are a therapist and you are seeing patients, then what you want to do, or what you should be doing, is completing an intake assessment. You should know what school life looked like for your patient, what the dynamics at home looked like. So the relationship between Wednesday and Morticia, we want to know that. There's friction there. So even though they're very similar in terms of personality and character, we see in Wednesday on Netflix that Morticia is very smart. She went to school, captain of the fencing team, and she's just very popular, doing all of these wonderful things, seems to be perfect at everything that she does. Wednesday is very similar. So we have Morticia and then we have Wednesday, who don't really see eye to eye, but they're very similar in terms of personality. They're very similar in terms of maybe this need for perfection. They're very, very similar, yet they do not get along very well. Wednesday wants to distance herself, while Morticia obviously wants Wednesday closer. And I think this is very typical in a mother-daughter relationship. So when daughter starts growing up and finding a sense of self and trying to figure out who she is, in the meantime, there could be butting heads, with mom. We see this often. We see this in family therapy, and we see this in individual therapy as well. So very common, but very important. Who does Wednesday confide in? Her father. So this is a dynamic that we want to explore as well. So what was it like growing up for Wednesday with her dad? What's her relationship like with her dad now? Any friction points, anything like that, we want to know. So now that we have an understanding of Wednesday Addams and her upbringing and what it was like for her to grow up until now, let's psychoanalyze and dive in. All right, so we want to understand first and foremost the way in which she thinks. What's her thinking process? So from an analytical perspective, it looks like Wednesday is sort of in between the neurotic and psychotic way of thinking. So what does this mean? Basically, a neurotic way of thinking is someone who is very analytical. A psychotic way of thinking is someone who is more sort of delusional. So someone, let's say, who is struggling with an eating disorder is going to look in the mirror and view themselves as 600 pounds, when in reality, they weigh maybe 90 pounds and are 5'4", right? So that's more of the psychotic way of thinking, right? So which is different from psychosis and the DSM definition of psychosis. So she's kind of in between, so she's borderline. So it's not as if she can't tell the difference between reality and what's fantasy, but what ends up happening is her mind is prone to splitting. So if you're not too sure what splitting is, you can check out this video where I talk about splitting of the ego, especially when I'm talking about borderline personality disorder and what that means. So essentially, splitting means that the mind splits in two. It's either black or white. So for Wednesday, people are either good or bad. People are either A or B. There's no gray area for her. So now that we understand her way of thinking, it's important to understand what her problem is, right? Because if we don't understand her problem, we can't help with a solution. So part of the problem here is that she's trying to find her identity. She's trying to find a sense of self. So think about it. She's at the age where she's trying to find a sense of identity versus confusion. If this is familiar and Erikson is ringing in your ears, then you're right. This is part of Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. So we see that Wednesday is trying to find herself. So even though she knows who she is in terms of her personality, because she mentions how it's so important when she talks to her dad not to lose sight of who she is, even though she has an understanding, she doesn't have a complete personality, meaning that there are still holes. She's still trying to find herself. And we do this not only through understanding our own minds, which is what Wednesday does, especially in the form of writing. She tries to really reflect and understand, but at the same time, we understand ourselves through other people as well, because then we understand how other people perceive us, receive us, interact with us. Do other people judge us? Do we feel that we're being judged by other people? This is very important to understand. So the problem here, especially if Wednesday were to come into therapy, would be to find and solidify a sense of self. She's able to have strong boundaries and stick to them, but there are holes in her personality, information that she just doesn't really know. In the first season, she was guided by Goody. In the second season, she's guided by Weems. So as you see, Wednesday needs this level of guidance. Even though that she feels as though that she's independent, she's not, because she needs support, she needs help. That's why mom tries to help, and that's why her spirit guides try to help. So now that we know the problem with regards to identity and finding a sense of identity and how to navigate interpersonal relationships, it's also going to be important to figure out what the solution is. So if Wednesday was a patient coming to see me, then I would complete an intake assessment. I would understand who Wednesday is from when she was born up until now, and then we would go from there. The treatment recommendation is outlining what the solution is. But before we understand the solution, we need to understand what she's going through within an analytical framework. So what does that mean? So before we articulate a solution, a treatment recommendation, we need to understand what is keeping Wednesday stuck from living a fulfilling life. So we need to understand what stops Wednesday or what prevents her from actually reaching her goal. So one defense mechanism that Wednesday Addams typically uses is intellectualization. So she uses theories or she uses facts, information to kind of offset or avoid what she's experiencing or what she's feeling. As an example, if Wednesday were to use intellectualization as a way to avoid her emotions, let's say she's talking to Enid, and Enid is very upset and she's just looking to bond, which means she wants to express herself emotionally and then wants Wednesday to express herself emotionally. Well, that's not gonna happen with Wednesday. So Wednesday might say something like, emotions are just electrochemical reactions in the brain and are nothing more than that. So instead of actually helping Enid with her dilemma or whatever is going on, or even if Wednesday has an emotion, she will use intellectualization, she will use facts, she will use philosophy, she will use science, she will use whatever she needs to do in order to avoid that topic. Another defense that Wednesday typically uses, which is very surprising but pretty accurate in my opinion, is reaction formation. So reaction formation has to do with expressing the opposite of what you're thinking, feeling, or have experienced. So for instance, with Wednesday, it seems as though that she's pretty accurate in terms of her description. So when she went to help Pugsley and support Pugsley when he was being bullied and he was shoved in the locker, she released piranhas in the pool. So she is sadistic in the sense of she seeks pleasure destroying other people, but at the same time too, she talks about death and she talks about disembowelment and torture and suffering as something that's very pleasurable. But I think on a deeper level, that's a mask for maybe just feeling fear of people leaving. So for instance, death is very final. So when someone dies, they leave. they're gone, right? Their body is here, it's rotting, nothing else is happening. They're not the person that they once were. I think maybe her fear, and this could be possible, I'm not too sure, I'm not Wednesday's therapist, but it could be very well possible that she is afraid of death and grieving in that sense. So let me explain. She's not afraid of death in the sense of she's not afraid to die. But I think what's important here is that if someone were to die, Pugsley, Uncle Fester, mom or dad, I think this would be devastating for her. And she would certainly mask it using intellectualization and everything else that she hides her emotions. This is important because it gives us a glimpse into Wednesday as a human, as an actual normie human. Now let's explore the psychosexual stages of development. So Freud discussed this. With regards to Wednesday, it's clear that she's stuck at the anal stage. So she's anal. And what does that mean? That she's particular, she's in control, that she needs to have this sense of control and structure and rigidity. If this doesn't happen, then there's this sense of chaos that she's actually uncomfortable with. So if you think about it, in the first season, as she's trying to figure out what's going on, there's a murderer on the loose. It's very disorganized, it's very chaotic, it's very all over the place. And you can see that Wednesday is stressed, she's overwhelmed. You don't necessarily see this in terms of how she speaks. If you're paying attention to her eyes, you can see that her eyes open when she experiences a form of heightened emotion, whatever that is, surprise, excitement, anger, whatever the case is, her eyes tell the story. Now let's talk about object relations. So we spoke about the psychosexual stages, we spoke about some defense mechanism. Now we want to understand object relations. So how does Wednesday internalize people in her mind? How does she see her sense of self? So we can see clearly that she internalizes mom, that mom is a love object that's in her mind, in her unconscious, and this is projected outwards. So whatever Wednesday does, she's essentially acting in line, in accordance with the object, the love object, Morticia, in her mind. So she sees her mom as someone that is perfect, or someone that had friends, and someone who wants romance and is in love and all of these things. So we can see through the series that she does project the internalized mother onto her situations. So we see in class that she knows a lot of information about plants and carnivorous plants. And she talks about her mom being very interested in plants. So she got her red thumb from her mother. So that is just one example of her projecting and acting in accordance with her love object being her mother. So the way in which she internalizes her mother, which might actually be different than mom in reality, but the way in which Wednesday internalizes mom now is projected outward as if she needs to act in accordance with that. Even though she said that she doesn't want to live in mom's shadow, that she doesn't want to be like her, I think that's a defense. I think the more in which she says that, she's trying to convince herself as opposed to convincing other people. I think there's a part of her that wants to be like her mother. So as we see, Wednesday has a terrible relationship with other people. She could care less about other people. What's fascinating is the relationship between Enid and Wednesday and how this develops in the first season and what it looks like in the second season. So if Wednesday has a limited range of emotion, or maybe she is a true psychopath in the sense of having a different brain structure than normies, right? The normative population, then how is it that she can have friends or care for someone like Enid or have a crush and all of these things? Which means that Wednesday must have some form of emotion. She must have some way of connecting with people, because if she didn't, then she couldn't care less about people like Enid or Tyler or Bianca or the school. She would just leave and do her own thing. Because remember, okay, Wednesday, season 1, episode 1, all she's interested in is writing. She wants to finish her book. Anything else that gets in the way, she really doesn't care about, as long as it's done out of her way so she can focus. So in other words, if Wednesday really wanted to be alone, then she had ample opportunity to be alone. She could have gone off, she could have been expelled from Nevermore, but she didn't. Not just because of wanting to solve the mystery of who the murderer was, but in my opinion, I think a part of her really wanted to make friends and connect with other people and have a life. For Wednesday, what does that mean? Who knows? Because she's still trying to find a sense of self. But we're starting to understand and dive deep into the unconscious, realizing that there might be other elements to Wednesday that we really didn't understand. There might be an empathetic Wednesday. Maybe that's the Wednesday that hugged Enid at the end of season 1. Because the Wednesday that we know that doesn't have any emotions wouldn't hug Enid, wouldn't care, because Wednesday wouldn't feel what Enid was feeling. But there are some emotions in Wednesday. All right, so now let's look at the big picture here. Like I said at the beginning, when we're trying to understand and trying to dictate a treatment recommendation, we want to understand the whole person, and we want to understand what is getting in the way of them achieving their goals, right? What are they avoiding? What are their resistances, conscious and unconscious? What's happening to them? Because if we don't understand these components, if we don't understand what works, what doesn't work, what gets in the way, what's going to threaten treatment, then it's going to be very difficult to anticipate what the treatment is going to look like in the sense of how we can support the patient. So if we say something along the lines of, okay, yeah, I see that you're struggling with emotions, you can't regulate your emotions, or you don't have very many emotions, you want to be alone, but you're finding that people are constantly bothering you, you don't like people, all of these things, it's great to know all of that information, but if we don't understand what stops someone or what gets in the way of someone's treatment, then we're doing them a disservice as a therapist. Because if we anticipate that what might get in the way, such as an unconscious defense mechanism, then we can say at the beginning of the treatment, Wednesday Addams, this is what you're coming in for. This is what you want to seek therapy for, is because you feel like you don't have an identity. You want to learn who you are. You want to solidify a sense of self. So then this way you can interact with people and interact with the world in such a way that's in accordance with your genuine sense of self. So if that's what the problem is, the solution is to process and find a way to have a completed sense of self. By articulating the treatment recommendation, we can use theory and we can use practical application along with what's being said by the patient in order to deliver that treatment recommendation. So for Wednesday, I'll say, okay, problem here is you have a fractured identity, that you have ideas and inklings of what or who you are, what you're made up of, to answer the question, who am I? You have answers for that, but you don't know how to navigate interpersonal relationships. You don't know your emotions and what's going on with your body right now during puberty, because emotions change, right? Hormones are running wild. It's just a difficult time. So by understanding what's going on in the body, by understanding what's going on in the mind, then she can live in accordance with her genuine sense of self. So what's the treatment recommendation? How do we solve the problem? We do this by looking at the various defenses, the various resistances within the unconscious mind, and we dig. So by saying in the treatment recommendation, as an example, Wednesday, part of your defense is reaction formation, and another defense is intellectualization. These two defenses prevent you from expressing yourself, prevent you from connecting with your own mind, which means if you're not able to connect with your mind and you're not able to process what's going on internally, and if you're not able to process what's going on internally, then this is going to contribute to the fractured sense of self, because you are avoiding your mind. By diving into your mind, by interacting with many different people, we begin to understand who we are, what we like, what's going on, and we will act in accordance with what we feel is within our genuine nature. So someone like Wednesday, who experiences reaction formation as a defense, will say things in opposition as a way to protect herself. So really for Wednesday, it's about breaking down those defenses. And it's about exploring and challenging her to talk about her emotions. Maybe not necessarily to feel right away, but to express her emotions, even if it's from an intellectual standpoint. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? Enid in season 1 was so angry with Wednesday because Wednesday almost got her killed. So she went off and was rooming with another peer, another student, for a little while. So even though Wednesday got apparently what she wanted, which is her alone time, we can see that this dynamic actually affected her, which means she doesn't always know how to navigate these dynamics. She doesn't necessarily know her emotions. So it's going to be important and a part of treatment to really understand these parameters. So now that we've psychoanalyzed Wednesday, you probably didn't know that she actually feels, that she does have a range of emotions, but it's quite limited. But it's something that is workable. Understanding yourself means that you're better able, you're more equipped at responding to certain stressful situations than reacting. The more in which you understand yourself, the more that you can act in accordance with your true sense of self. If you don't know who you are, then you're going to be making decisions that could be way out of line, right? And far removed from the person that you are, meaning that you're pushing yourself doing something that you don't want to do. Why are you doing that? If you're able to live in accordance with your genuine sense of self, which means you're able to act from the part of your psyche that is you, right? Entirely you, and not stemming from some belief from society or judgment from society. If you do you and live your best life, then that's what's important. That's how you can solidify your identity. That's how you can really know yourself. But if you're going with the flow, if you're on autopilot, if you're just listening to what other people say, then chances are you're not living your best life and you're not living in line with who your true sense of self is. When you don't live in line with who you are, who you're genuinely meant to be, then this is where psychopathology comes into play. Because the more in which we fight against who we are, what we're made up of, what we want, all of these things, then we're going to find more and more often we're going to be stressed, we're going to be tired, we're going to be sick, we're going to experience pathologies like anxiety and depression and eating disorders. All of this stems from the unconscious mind being tainted and forgotten about. Stuff happens to us. We can't stop it. We don't have to be deadpan about it. We don't have to walk through life avoiding. Our superpower is getting to know who we are, because the more in which we get to know who we are, the more that we can rule our own world. We can be free to make choices that are in line with what our ideal life is. You have the power, you have the freedom, you have the choice. It's just now determine what you want your life to look like. I'm here to support you, so keep following for more. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like, give a comment, let's interact. If you agree with what I said, fantastic. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you don't, I would love to know if you think something different. So talk to me and tell me about it.